Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, as we begin to wind down 2024, I've been looking back and trying to select some of my favorites. So for today's list, I've compiled my top 10 comic paperback editions 2024. Now yes, some of these paperbacks came out this year, the year 2024, others may have come out earlier, but I had the chance to read them for the first time this year. Whatever the case, I did go ahead and make my list, and I can't wait to start talking about them with all of you. I definitely enjoy trade paperbacks as a format for comic books. I think they're kind of underrated, and I think they're a lot more accessible price-wise to a lot of people just wanting to dive into the medium. But anyway, before we start the list, I would like to shout out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can use my discount code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a great way to support this channel. Thanks everyone, now let's go ahead and start this top 10 list. First on our list today, in no particular order, we have Ultimate Invasion by Jonathan Hickman from Marvel Comics. This is a trade paperback that I really loved this year. For those that perhaps don't know, Marvel Comics kicked off a brand new Ultimate Universe. They first created a side Ultimate Universe back in the early 2000s. That universe kind of resolved itself after the events of Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, and since then there really hasn't been much going on with the Ultimate Universe. I hadn't heard any whispers or rumors, and all of a sudden here we are. Hickman kicks off a brand new universe that, as far as I can tell, is completely unrelated to the previous Ultimate Marvel Universe. This does give us a parallel Marvel universe to basically play in. We have the Maker, who was one of the remnants of the last Ultimate Universe, basically creating his own new one. We have a lot of remixed heroes, villains, and setups, which I like, but it all begins here with this 4-part miniseries. And while I do think it's helpful to have a general understanding of the Marvel Universe and perhaps know a bit about the Maker, I think that you can actually read this to set up the Ultimate Universe without really knowing too much else about Marvel Comics, and you would have a pretty good foundation to enjoy the subsequent Ultimate Marvel Comics releases that they've been putting out this year. This paperback was definitely anticipated by me when I heard the new universe was kicking off, and for those interested, I did do a full review of this book just a couple months ago on the channel. But yeah, this was really fun for me. I think as a fan of the Maker and some of the Fantastic Four mythos, and just generally the previous Ultimate Marvel Universe and just Marvel in general, this is really fun. I can't wait to see what Hickman and team do within this fun new sandbox, and as a Marvel reader, this is perhaps the most excited I've been to check out a line of new titles from this publisher in a hot minute. I've really enjoyed this so far. I have read some of Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate Black Panther. I am looking forward to finally checking out Ultimate X-Men coming up here pretty soon by Peach Momoko. I've heard kind of interesting mixed reviews on that, but I for one can't wait to check it out when I have an opportunity. Until then though, this definitely makes my top 10 list for the year for paperbacks. Don't miss out on Ultimate Invasion. Next up, we have a book I've already discussed a couple times on the channel. This is Feral Volume 1 Indoor Cats by Tony Fleecs, Trish Forstner, and more over at Image Comics. After the outrageous success we saw with Stray Dogs a couple years ago, the team came back together to basically kick off a new ongoing series. This is essentially, what if you had a bunch of house cats that are animated or depicted in a kind of Disney cartoony-esque style? What if you cross that with essentially a zombie apocalypse narrative? This is a world where a very virulent and mutated form of rabies has struck and basically turns all of these kind of animal creatures into these rabid zombie-like monsters. And it's up to these band of cats to basically survive and try to find their way back home. This is a really great title. I was so excited when I heard the team from Stray Dogs was coming up with something else. I like that it's an ongoing as opposed to Stray Dogs, which was more or less a self-contained miniseries. I look look forward to reading subsequent volumes of this book. I had a blast with it. I think that this is a nice light horror kind of series. If you don't like any kind of animal violence, though, I do want to give a bit of a trigger warning because we do have some animal situations going on. We have rabies, things like that. But if you can stomach that, this is a fun series. I think the characterization is all there. It's definitely a good foundational volume. I felt within the couple issues we have collected in this paperback, I got a good feel for what this series is, and like I mentioned earlier, I can't wait to see where we go from here. Another reason this is on my top 10 is I had an opportunity to meet Tony Fleecs, the writer, and Tone Rodriguez, which is one of the illustrators on this volume, at my local comic shop. They were generous with their time, quite kind, and they signed both this and my paperback of Stray Dogs, which I was elated for. But yeah, this series is a ton of fun. If you're looking for something a little bit off the beaten path, or if this sounds striking to you, I definitely recommend it. This is another book I did review in full on my channel not too long ago, if you want to go ahead and catch up and check it out for more details. Don't miss out on Feral. Next up, we have the Creature Commandos trade paperback that they released fairly recently from DC Comics. This is a really fun little collection of weird war tales from DC. I think a lot of these stories came out in, I believe, the early 80s. We have a nice little chronological chunk here. This is a kind of Suicide Squad-like team book, but instead of a bunch of villains, we basically have a bunch of men who were experimented on by this faction of the US government to become kind of Squad M for Monster. Basically, this group of people, we have one guy that's sort of a Frankenstein-like monster creature that's been stitched back together. We have another guy that was experimented on, and now he can become a werewolf, but he shifts in and out of that form without his control. We also have a guy that is sort of a synthetic vampire, which is really fascinating. Throughout the pages, we also are exposed to kind of a robot soldier and a Gorgon Medusa-like woman that joins the team. They're all led by this really corrupt government official that, kind of helped turn them into monsters. So the setup is really fascinating, I think. This is still at a time where the comic series itself maybe doesn't have a lot of the modern storytelling kind of mechanics, but the stories are all really strong. We have a lot of writing here from J.M. DeMatteis and a lot of great artwork throughout as well. This is a real joy to flip through. I'm still actually finishing it out, so as a heads up, I haven't completely finished this book, but because a lot of the stories are more or less episodic, it does kind of read great as a sort of one and done. I pick up an issue, put it back on the shelf, and so forth. Haven't exactly been binge reading it, but I have enjoyed my time within this world and within these pages. Now, admittedly, I am a sucker for kind of the Universal Monsters set of characters, so I had a feeling that this would grip me. I also think DC released this in conjunction with the Creature Commandos animated series coming out shortly from James Gunn. It might even be out already by the time I actually drop this video. But yeah, basically, he's adapting kind of this property, maybe some new characters thrown in there, but I think DC released this kind of in conjunction with that. But I'm really happy they did, because otherwise I would never have known about this franchise, and as someone who likes some of the Universal Monsters and J.M. DeMatteis, this really is a fun hidden gem that I certainly hope more people pick up. Now, this is an example of a book that's been out for a while, but I finally had an opportunity to read it this year. This is The Underwater Welder by Jeff Lemire. I believe this came out from Top Shelf, but this is one that's been on my wish list kind of to read for some time now. I am admittedly a big fan of Jeff Lemire, where I've read his stuff over the years, like Moon Knight or Animal Man, or some of his more indie titles, like what I've read of Black Hammer and some of these other books. But this was one I always heard mention of when we talk more about Lemire's creator-owned work. I know this is kind of a black and white story about fatherhood, or reflections on that in a way. What I didn't know until I bought it, though, was how closely this felt like an episode of The Twilight Zone, and I mean that in the best way possible. Underwater Welder tells a story about a man who is, you guessed it, an underwater welder in a small coastal town. Him and his wife or significant other are expecting a baby boy in any minute now. She's pregnant, she's due, and he's struggling kind of in a lot of ways to come to terms with that or feel ready for it. He had kind of a broken, abusive sort of father situation himself. Abusive might not even be the best term, but his father was less than perfect, we'll say. And anyway, this whole story is a reflection on fatherhood and legacy and what you want your role to be in this, and kind of looking back, looking ahead. And again, I don't even know if I'm selling it correctly, but we have all of those great themes and kind of motivational and foundational pieces mixed with this kind of surreal adventure into this kind of, well, basically like a Twilight Zone situation. We basically have him showing up in a world that's like his, but dissimilar, and he's kind of walking through his own past in a way. But yeah, all brilliantly done, written and illustrated by Lemire in his really iconic kind of scratchy style. But I think this book is an absolute triumph. It deserves every piece of accolade I've ever heard about it, and I really, really think it's a fantastic book. I consider this a comic book classic, and one I would recommend to just about everyone. I'm so happy I finally had a chance to read it this year, and it's easily on my top 10 paperbacks I've encountered. Swinging back over to the world of DC Comics, we have Batman White Knight presents Harley Quinn. This is a Harley Quinn story set within the world of Sean Murphy's Batman White Knight. This is part of the DC Black Label collection. I will say this book is so stellar. I've talked about it on a couple other videos myself. I've done a review of it. I wasn't really sure what to expect from this initially. This is a spin-off of the kind of mainline White Knight titles. It does take place after Batman Curse of the White Knight, and yes, Sean Murphy is involved, but Katana Collins really takes center stage here as the primary writer throughout this whole collection. The art as well has a lot of fidelity to the White Knight universe, while still feeling decidedly different and fresh in some really exciting ways. The Harley Quinn we get in this White Knight universe, without spoiling too much, is honestly one of the best, most well-rounded incarnations of this character I've ever had the pleasure of reading. I actually think my favorite renditions of Harley Quinn are probably this, along with the Harleen kind of graphic novel from Stefan Sajek. I just think they do so much with the character, and I just find it to be really fantastic. Also, a shout out to Batman Mad Love, and of course the Batman animated series, if we're looking into animation. But yeah, this collection's really great. I do think it would be helpful to read both White Knight and Curse of the White Knight before picking this up, because where Harley Quinn as a character finds herself is very much in a time and place after the events of those collections. But I think if you read those, I absolutely recommend taking the detour and kind of reading this sort of spin-off volume. Some people go straight from Curse of the White Knight to White Knight Beyond, and I understand that, but I think that this is really worth the time, especially if this character has really any interest for you. I really can't recommend it highly enough. The artwork as well is, again, just really, really top-notch. I love the characters they bring into this book and they introduce. I also like the throwback to the other kind of White Knight entries thus far, and yeah, a really strong book here. And this is also the first work I've ever read from Katana Collins, and I recommend her highly. And hey, while I have you, if you're watching this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book lists like this, unboxings, comic book reviews, shorts, and more. Thank you for considering. Now on with the show. My next pick for my top 10 favorite paperbacks this year is easily Declan Shalvey's Old Dog, Redact 1. This is a volume 1 for this ongoing series from Declan Shalvey by way of Image Comics. If you don't know anything about Old Dog, it is a fun creator-owned series that is both written and illustrated by the incredible Declan Shalvey. I did have an opportunity to speak to Declan earlier this year, which I really relished, and I was able to speak to him a bit about this series. Essentially, it is a kind of clandestine sort of espionage action thriller that also mixes in elements of science fiction, mystery, and even body horror, which was a fun and delightful surprise throughout this first volume. I really thought the mixing of genres was something truly unique and novel, and I couldn't help myself from being absolutely riveted. The issues themselves felt in many ways like vignettes. We have each issue kind of corresponding for the most part to some kind of mission that the Old Dog main character, this older looking agent, have to go about, but there's also a kind of central conspiracy. We have a lot of cool flashbacks and things, and as a reader you get to piece together kind of what this world is, what's going on, and who is this main character, what happened to him, what is this group he's working for, are they the good guys, are they the bad guys, and where do we go from here. There's also a really interesting kind of father-daughter tale in the mix here, and I think that Declan handles this all extremely well. This was another title that I just felt like like was so unique. I've read a lot of other great kind of spy thriller kinds of comics, whether that be James Bond or some other things, but this was really fun in the way it blended and played with genre. I felt like all the twists and turns were really deserved and earned, the characters were all there, and I just thought the art was breathtaking. There's actually an issue that's set in the snow that I just thought was absolutely gorgeous. The way Shalvey experimented with coloring in that issue, it just was so different and set apart from anything before or after in this collection, and that's just one small example of what I think makes this series great. Again, if you're looking for something off the beaten path a bit that you maybe haven't heard of yet, I definitely recommend Old Dog. Next up is a comic I've definitely wanted to talk about again. This is Predator vs. Wolverine from Marvel Comics. This was written by Benjamin Percy with art from Ken Lashley and others. This was such a fun miniseries this year. I already had it on a couple lists, I've reviewed it, and I even selected it as my favorite crossover on the Brave and the Boys kind of big crossover video that Jake invited me to do a couple months back. Anyway, this is a really fun collection. Essentially, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's Predator, it's Wolverine, and yes, they are on a collision course. But the novel thing about this series, I thought, was that because Wolverine has that unique healing factor, longevity, and also kind of a fractured memory, the way this plays within the Predator franchise and universe, I just thought it worked really well. We first have the Predator encountering Wolverine when he's a young boy. He's manifested his mutant abilities, but this is long before he has the adamantium skeleton or becomes an X-Men, and we have them kind of in this battle to the death in this small town, and then we basically flash forward another issue where he's maybe during the Weapon X program, we have another issue where maybe it's during his time with the X-Men, and this Predator just keeps coming back to try to hunt him as this really interesting prey or piece of game, and the Wolverine just won't go down quietly. I really like this approach. I like that each of the issues kind of corresponded to a different time and place within the world of Wolverine, and overall we had this big overarching frame narrative that was in the modern day and is supposedly the final fight between these two. That was all illustrated by Ken Lashley, and then each of the subsequent flashbacks had a different artist, which I thought was a really fun approach. A really beautiful series that does not overstay its welcome. I think this whole book is maybe 4 issues if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's all great. I had a blast with this book. Yeah, 4 or 5 issues. But anyway, I just really can't speak highly enough about it. I don't think you really need to know a ton about either character or franchise to enjoy it. But certainly if you're a fan of Wolverine or Predator, there's a lot of great touches, flourishes, Easter eggs, and it's just one heck of a time. Great action sequences throughout, and I just really liked it. I can't say it highly enough. It's just a great blockbuster action thriller with some fantastic art. Next on our list today is Rogue Sun, Volume 1, Cataclysm by Ryan Parrott and Abel. For those that don't know, this series comes by way of Image Comics, and it's within that greater massive verse universe that kicked off with Kyle Higgins' Radiant Black. And even though this is part of a shared universe, you can absolutely read this just completely blank slate. You don't need to read anything else to enjoy this book. You just start with this Volume 1. But essentially, this is kind of a mythical superhero paranormal kind of superhero narrative. We basically have a titular hero, obviously Rogue Sun, in this battle against all of these kind of supernatural evil villains. He loses his life, but the Rogue Sun power is inherited by his estranged son. The son really doesn't want to have anything to do with his father's legacy, but he does take on this suit and become the new Rogue Sun. Along the way, he has to battle with his father's newer family that he was never a part of. We have his relationship with his mother coming into contention as he's stepping into this mantle, and we have a lot of other kind of otherworldly or supernatural threats. It's a really fun book. The art throughout it is really sharp and interesting. The character is kind of unlikable, I would say, in many ways, but he has enough depth to him that I'm excited to see more development in the future. This Volume 1 was a fantastic start to a series, and I just had a blast with it. At the front of the collection, we even have a blurb from Eric Kripke, who is the creator of the Supernatural TV series, which I was a huge fan of. When I saw that endorsement, I had a feeling that this book would be right up my alley, and it certainly didn't disappoint. Ever since reading this book, I have been looking for an opportunity to read subsequent volumes, and to date, I still have not. I hope this series keeps up because I really did enjoy this first volume. In fact, in the comments, if you've been reading Rogue Sun, or if you've read further than this first volume, I'd love to hear in the comments, does the series hold up? What do you think about it? Like I said, I would really like to return return to this sometime, and I would love additional feedback. But for now, definitely making my list for top 10 paperbacks this year. As a fan of the CW's Arrow series from maybe a decade ago, and to just generally liking Green Arrow in the DC Comics universe, I always knew it was a matter of time before I checked out Andy Diggle and Jock's Green Arrow Year 1. They've released this series in a number of different formats over the years. I finally had an opportunity to find an old paperback at a used comic book store not too long ago. That's the book you see here in my hands. This book, again, is a good example of one that did not come out in 2024, but rather one I finally read in 2024, and I cannot speak highly enough about it. Like the title may suggest, this is a Green Arrow origin story, and I could tell that the Arrow CW series took heavily from this series to kind of make their roadmap for the series. I just really like it. I think this book really works, and whether you have pre-existing knowledge of Green Arrow, whether it was the television series, animation, or comic books, or you're just a completely blank slate, you can absolutely enjoy this book. It is Year 1. It is the origin of Green Arrow. We basically have Oliver Queen, a kind of disillusioned boy billionaire who gets stranded on an island after he's betrayed, and all of a sudden he has to survive. He has to care about something, and he has to become something more. He becomes a Robin Hood-like vigilante, donning a kind of green costume with this bow and arrow, and he tries to survive on the island, stop a drug cartel, and make his way home. It's really fascinating. The art from Jock throughout is absolutely gorgeous. I think the coloring is really inspired. The character work is all there. The miniseries doesn't overstay its welcome, and yet I was on the edge of my seat the entire read-through. This was a book that was exceedingly easy to binge read. It was exciting, it was tense, and it has me completely reevaluating my opinions on Andy Diggle's writing. I never really didn't like this guy, but the only thing I'd read from Diggle before checking this out was actually his run on Daredevil, which was admittedly not my favorite run in that character's history. But I found Green Arrow Year 1 to be so good, I'm actually open for more Andy Diggle comic book recommendations. Please throw those down in the comments as well if you are a fan, because this has me absolutely on the Andy Diggle train. A really fantastic work here that I'd recommend to just about anyone interested in this character. And last, but certainly not least, on my top 10 comic book paperbacks of this year, 2024, I have to talk about Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 1, Married with Children by Jonathan Hickman. This is a part of that new Marvel Ultimate Universe I was just discussing when I went over to Ultimate Invasion, and this was an absolute brilliant book. This gave me everything I've wanted in a Spider-Man book from some time. It basically takes place in this new Ultimate Universe. This is an older, kind of approaching middle-aged Peter Parker who is married to Mary Jane Watson with 2 young kids. He never became Spider-Man until now. And we have a brand new unseasoned Spider-Man who's older in his life and now has an entire family unit to protect and just still be a part of, while he's also trying to venture into superheroics in this broken universe. We have a couple notable remixes of fan-favorite Spider-Man characters, and I couldn't help but smile from ear to ear as I saw the twists and turns we got in this very first volume. Hickman for me has never disappointed, and this is a really stellar start to what I hope is a long and fruitful series. To me, so far, this is the crowning jewel of the new Marvel Ultimate Universe, and as a longer-term Spider-Man fan, this almost feels like a wish fulfillment kind of book. This is easily the most excited I've been to have an ongoing Spider-Man title in some time, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. Now, you can go in just from this very first book and get started, and you won't be at too much of a disadvantage. However, I highly recommend you check out first that Ultimate Invasion miniseries, and if possible, the kind of Ultimate Universe one-shot issue that Hickman released as well. I believe that's going to be included in the upcoming Ultimates Volume 1, which is basically their Avengers book. But yeah, those will really help tee off what we have here. There is kind of a previously on at the beginning of this book that will help you, though, if you just want to buy the Spider-Man title. But as of right now, this series is still ongoing, and I'm still hearing a lot of positive praise for the work here. But I can say with this first volume, I absolutely loved it. And I hope you will too. But this is why I put it on my top 10 list of comic book paperbacks for this year. Wow, I can't believe we did it, but here we are. This is my top 10 comic book paperback editions for 2024. These trade paperbacks were an absolute delight as I went through them throughout this year. There are so many more I could have thrown on this list, but this is ultimately what I distilled it down to when I looked at my collection. I would love to hear in the comments what were some of your favorite paperback releases you read or that came out this year that you would love to recommend. I always love to get great, rich recommendations of books I perhaps haven't heard of yet, or maybe I've heard some but I needed more feedback, and maybe your recommendations just what I need to finally check it out for myself. And more than that, hopefully there's others in the comments that would get their own recommendations on when they can dive right in. Like I said, I do think paperbacks are a fantastic place to enter into this medium, and I think in a world where so many people focus on omnibuses, absolutes, or these great, more prestigious hardcover volumes, I sometimes think trade paperbacks can get overshadowed, and I think that's a shame. They have such an ease of reading, and there are certain stories that are only collected in paperbacks so far. Definitely don't miss out on checking it out, and let me know some of your paperback recommendations in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave this video a like, maybe a comment, and share the video with a friend. Thanks so much. Have a good one.